Are events transpiring today, such as domestic surveillance, the stagnant economy, and drone wars across the globe and domestically, the signs of the end of America? Or are these just the latest installments in a long history of abuses by those in power that date back to the earliest days of the Roman Empire? While Democrats blame Republicans for the economic woes caused by the Bush administration and the GOP place the blame for the nanny state on the left, ordinary people continue in many ways to be left misrepresented. Documents detailing questionable practices by the federal government have been released by the thousands from whistleblowers like Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden. These revelations are raising anger around the country over the behavior of those charged with protecting America from threats to our society. While the United States remains the world's lone military superpower, there are many people who are beginning to question whether these events are similar to what occurred in the Roman Empire before it collapsed roughly 1,500 years ago. Our guest today is Olga Ravassi. She is a co-founder of Serbian Radio Chicago. She's also a political analyst. She's worked in television and radio for media outlets including ABC and NBC. She's also working towards her PhD in foreign policy. Ravassi was featured in a video from 2012 focusing on how libertarian firebrand Ron Paul was viewed from a Serbian perspective. The interview made the rounds on the internet during the election cycle, helping to build Ravassi's name recognition. Now, in July, she wrote an article called The Collapse of Empire, in which Ravassi makes some startling predictions about what will happen to the United States in the near future. We're happy today to talk to her about this recent article. Welcome to the show, Olga.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, for those people out there who have not read your article, Collapse of the Empire, give us a brief overview of your perspective on the history of America's democratic republic and where you think the country's headed.
I think the Constitution that we have is one of the finest documents that has ever been written in history. Unfortunately, more and more we are pushing it away, shoving it under the carpet, and not really using it as the law of the land. Various wars that we are involved in around the world, the domestic policies, the scandals that our administration has unfortunately labeled phony, are leading me to believe that we are spiraling out of control.
Now, the scandals you're speaking of are?
NSA, Benghazi, things of that nature. And those were the reasons that actually I wrote the article, because once you put all of these things that have transpired together.
The IRS targeting as well?
IRS targeting Republican organizations, all of this just based on, political preference. I'm seeing a particular trend, and people are really getting sick and tired and fed up of the wars, of everything that is going on, and unfortunately, we are not seeing any benefits in the country. Maybe what I'm going to say right now it's not very ethical, it's not very moral, but at least if we were involved in all of these wars, if we were spying the general population, at least I would like to see that our infrastructure is blossoming, our economy is blossoming, the middle class is prospering and having jobs. The gas prices at the pump are low, so somewhere there I could maybe even justify it. But this way, I just see that average Americans are struggling very much. We are spiraling out of control economically, foreign policy. Everything is just become too big. We have unsustainable debt, and I don't think, quite frankly, we are bankrupt, and I don't think we are going to be able to carry on much longer.
Now, what specific events have taken place in your life? Now, how long have you been in America?
Since 1994.
And you emigrated because of?
We immigrated from Serbia. Originally, part of my childhood I spent in Sarajevo, while Yugoslavia as a country was still together.
So you've witnessed an economic collapse.
The war, I witnessed the economic collapse. Yugoslavia started breaking apart. Once the Soviet Union fell apart, Yugoslavia was always that balance between East and West. It was sort of a mix of, so Yugoslavia was never that heavy communist country. You know, there was a famous note that Tito said to Stalin in 1952, I believe. So we were very much a combination of East meets West, capitalism meets socialism. It was somewhat a prosperous country, but at a point when Soviet Union collapsed, the Berlin Wall came down, Yugoslavia was just deemed unnecessary.
So you saw firsthand what an economic collapse looks like, what a country breaking up actually looks like.
Yes.
Firsthand.
Firsthand, I have experienced it. I have gone through the war. I have lived in Sarajevo when Bosnia started falling apart. I went back to Serbia where I was born. I was born in Belgrade originally. In 1994, we decided as a family to come here. But I can tell you, you know, having your homeland fall apart and experiencing something like that once in your life, I am afraid that I am again setting myself living here and setting my family, setting my children up for the same thing, and that very much scares me because I'm seeing similarities.
So your family came here to escape the war, to escape the economic collapse,
yes.
And now you're seeing that,
and I'm
those
seeing
things happening
similarities here because we have, you know, although the regimes are very different, you know, our system is different, but at the same time, we as a country are spreading ourselves too thin. We have unsustainable debt, and I just don't know how much longer we can carry on.
Well, let's talk about those similarities, because in your article, you compare the current conditions in the United States to those in the Roman Empire, and your homeland was once part of the Roman Empire. So just before its collapse, you talk about that in your article. Can you expand upon some of those similarities, the parallels between the United States and the Roman Empire?
Well, where I was going beyond political, Roman Empire obviously has also spread itself all over the world. But beyond political similarities, I think there are many similarities in certain social aspects. I think the Roman Empire at some point became very hedonistic, very self-centered, self-absorbed. I think the social policies have also been a part of the demise, as well as the silver coin that they were using, the denarius, started losing its value. So basically we are seeing the similarities in undervaluing the currency as it's happening with the dollar here.
So you're saying America has fallen into a self-centered, hedonistic, fiat-driven
currency. We are unable to sustain our debt. Unfortunately, we are beginning to run the country almost as a reality show. We are nurturing the cult of personality, cult of celebrity, and we are seeing that with our politicians. We are seeing it with this administration, very much so.
You think that America is starting to view the politicians more along the lines of reality show celebrities,
absolutely,
rather than representatives of the people?
I think we are, you know, threading that dangerous ground.
Could that be said about our president?
Media is absolutely. You know, I think mainstream media is very much contributing to this. And instead of taking the political office seriously, we are sort of viewing it through these eyes of the reality shows that are almost brainwashing the population and producing these low information voters who are very emotionally manipulated in order to vote a certain way. And unfortunately, we are being manipulated through many social issues that I'm not saying they're unimportant, but I'm saying that there are many pressing issues that we really need to deal with right now, and leaving some of the social issues at bay. And quite frankly, I don't think federal government really needs to be even involved in those.
What would you say are some of the most pressing issues that need to be addressed right now?
I think economy and foreign policy. And the reason why I keep going back to foreign policy, it is one of my expertise, but people don't make the connection between economy and foreign policy. And I think they're very much dependent on each other. The wars and the military-industrial complex that we are so heavily investing in, more than the first 10 combined countries altogether in the world, are actually creating this economic demise. And unfortunately, the fractions in the world that we have chosen to support are maybe going to also help this demise. And I'm not projecting that we are just going to collapse tomorrow. I think we are still, a great country. And it's unfortunate because many hardworking, noble Americans have worked so hard and have given their best to create this country into what it is and to create that American dream that, many people around the world are dreaming to come here and are dreaming of those possibilities. But the way we have conducted certain policies, I think that American dream is dying. And average Americans really are on a receiving end of very, very negative sentiments around the world.
Now, the Roman Republic lasted for over 500 years, but it slowly diminished over the decades due to numerous civil wars, the clipping of their currencies, you mentioned the denarius, and the eventual self-appointment by Julius Caesar as dictator for life in 44 BC. How do you see the future of the United States transpiring if America continues down its parallel path with the former Roman Empire?
Quite frankly, as I said, I don't see it happening quickly, but I think we will just, at some point, either people will get fed up. Certain things that have transpired recently, and I will mention the Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, civil rights activists, they keep stirring the pot in a direction that really scares me because I think we are very much polarized society. I think we are dangerously divided. The saying, united we stand, seriously needs a makeover because things like that, God forbid, something happens in this country that will really push those buttons with people because at this point we are, people are desperate, they're jobless. They don't see any kind of solid future. If something happens and transpires that pushes those buttons, I'm afraid we will be on the verge of a civil war. And if that happens, it's going to be a bloodbath here. So and as I said, nothing was more obvious to me than, this recent case, Zimmerman Martin. It just made me think how divided we actually are. And instead of standing up together, we are allowing the government and the civil rights activists to continue to stir the pot, even talking about women's issues, abortion, marriage equality. All of these things are dividing the nation instead of putting it together. And when you have a nation that is so desperate economically, you have the middle class that is being wiped out, then it's very easy to tread on these emotions of people.
How can we change that? As a nation, the polarity of these issues, the social issues especially, how do we bring the people together and give that statement, united we stand, how do we give it the makeover?
The makeover. What really strikes me is the way our education is going. And I think it's going in a negative direction.
When you say education, do you mean
the education
public school system,
the public school system, and the education system overall? I've been, I finished high school back in Europe, and then when I came here, I started college here, and now I'm at a PhD level. So I've been through the university system, but at the same time, I am seeing, I'm going to send my kids very soon into the public school system. I am seeing a particular way of indoctrination, and also I am seeing kids being molded in the universities and in elementary schools to think a certain way and to not really question and to not think for themselves. So I think the education system continues to produce that kind of a voter that is not really well informed. Some statistics say that many Americans do not know how to use a map. There's a saying, war is a way to teach Americans geography. Well, I actually think we haven't learned much. Many Americans don't know how to use a map, nor even find Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran on the map. So unfortunately, that is a big part, getting the people informed. And the mainstream media plays a very big role in that.
So, let me try to go back to what you said. if we're going to give United We Stand a makeover, it starts with education. And you believe that the education centers are more like indoctrination centers. So then it comes back down to education to really change the way people are educated. How do we do that? How do we get to that point? How do we change that education system when we know that policies are being handed down from the United Nations, from the Department of Education, down to the state, and then down to the local level? How do we change that when it seems like local education is so far away, so far removed?
Well, it seems, you know, there have been calls for elimination of Department of Education. I think that could be a good start. Homeschooling is another option, and more I hear people calling for such things. I think also what's very important within this education system, the family structure. I think we have lost touch with some of those doctrines that this country was founded upon. You know, strong family unit, strong education, media that is really questioning, that is justifying the job of a journalist, not media that is spinning the stories going along the policies of the administrations that are in power. So, you know, it's a multifaceted thing. It's not just one issue. There are many things that contribute to the situation that we are in. But I would say starting with education, eliminating certain departments, maybe homeschooling, maybe changing the process of standardized testing. You know, I was educated in Europe. Our education was very different. As I said, it's multifaceted. It comes from family, comes from education, comes from the media, comes from the society. I think we have just become kind of removed from each other.
Well, let's talk about that, because young people in the United States overwhelmingly supported calls by Barack Obama in 2008 against war and domestic spying. However, after 4 years of continuing many of the same policies as George W. Bush, many of them came out once again in 2012 to support the re-election of President Obama. Why do you believe the youth were taking such an active role in Obama's first run as president, and why have so many continued to support his efforts now?
I think initially the platform that President Obama was presenting and the acceptance that he actually had around the world was almost unprecedented. You know, it hasn't happened in a long time. And the fact that, you know, everybody has labeled him the first African-American president, of course, I would, you know, say he is obviously mixed. But, you know, many issues have come, and he has become an embodiment of something that America was really striving towards and looking for. He ran on a platform of a change. He ran on a platform of transparency, of ending the wars, of closing Gitmo, of so many things people were really looking forward to. So he really gathered that youth, and he gathered that positive energy that really exists in this country. Young people, educated people were hoping, truly hoping for this change. And that is why they stood behind him initially. His second term, I think, and I had these conversations with many of my friends, I was questioning the reasoning why they would again vote for this administration, simply, you know, seeing what has transpired in the past 4 years. I think they were faced with choosing between two evils, and ultimately many of them decided that going Mitt Romney route, going Republican route, would be a bigger evil. I also remember Michael Moore coming out and saying, well, we are at a crossroads and we are having to choose between the two evils. And I think American public is very tired of choosing between two evils. It really, it's not an option. But at the same time, you know, there's nothing else to do. There were other candidates there, but then again, you have media who is spinning it so much that those candidates cannot even have any airtime. So basically, I wouldn't go so far to say that Democrats and Republicans, the establishment parties, were basically looking at one token with two faces. There isn't really that much difference, especially when it comes to foreign policy. So that young energy, the youth vote, they basically decided, well, it's better to pick, lesser of the two evils. So they did it again, unfortunately, thinking that there is no other option.
Olga, some may object to the way you label the United States as an empire. They could argue we have an electoral system, as imperfect as it may be, and that America's foreign policy is actually serving the best interests of the American people. How do you respond to that objection?
Unfortunately, the way I see it, I think our appetites have become imperial, and that is the reason why I labeled it an empire. We are all over the world. We have 192 bases in various foreign countries, military bases. We are in this perpetual state of warfare. And it seems that this strength that we have gained from warfare is something that is becoming so inbred in our society that I am afraid that we don't have a way out. It has become a pillar of our existence, and that is something that really scares me. It is creating negative sentiments towards America, towards Americans around the world. And we are, quite frankly, being viewed as an empire who has huge appetites and who is looking to militarily control every single aspect of the world. We are also looking to control different resources. We're looking to control different enemies. And at the same time, we are making sure that certain countries are enemies. For instance, I think we are making sure that Russia is an enemy. NATO is making sure that Russia, China, Venezuela, various countries are perpetual enemies, and that we always have something brewing in order to continue NATO support. NATO was very much seen as undesirable after the Warsaw Pact collapse, and it really didn't have a role. That is where the Balkans come in. The Yugoslavia was artificially made to fall apart with foreign influences in order to deem NATO legitimate and needed. And at this point, NATO is so overwhelmingly huge through different organizations, Partnership for Peace, etc., that we are basically looking for worldwide domination militarily without consequences and without approval by the United States Congress, without the approval by the Security Council of the United Nations, which is basically what happened in Serbia. The way they decided to bomb Serbia, they didn't have an approval of...
Well, let me ask you, though, about the best interests of America. Is the expansion that we're seeing, is that in the best interests of America?
I don't think so. Quite frankly, as I said in the beginning, I could maybe even justify everything that is going on around the world if American people, if this country was benefiting economically, if we were prospering. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We are jobless. People are desperate. The oil prices are out of control. Gas prices at the pump are out of control. So I'm failing to see what the benefit is. I think those who benefit are very select few who have worked their way up the ranks and who are going through this revolving door of private and public sector. And I will give you an example. For instance, Wesley Clark was involved in bombing of Serbia. He was the head of NATO at the time. Madeleine Albright at the time was Secretary of State. After everything has settled, and after Kosovo and Metohija were stolen basically from the Serbian people, and Serbian people expelled from Kosovo, all of the mines, coal, many minerals, that Kosovo is very rich. We don't have oil, but we have so many other things. Kosovo was basically given to these thugs, to these criminals, to run as an illegal state, illegal NATO entity that at this point has the largest NATO base in the world.
So you're saying, when you say thugs, you're speaking of Albright
No. I'm speaking of the alleged Kosovar government.
Okay.
The ethnic Albanians that have taken over the government, that, Madeleine Albright and Wesley Clark and Bill Clinton administration was very much cozying up
So the
to.
thugs you're speaking of, just to clarify for our audience,
Sure.
is the people that were appointed by the United States.
By the United States to lead this newly created artificial state of Kosovo. It is a NATO state. It has the largest NATO base in Europe, Camp Bondsteel. And where I was going with mentioning Madeleine Albright and mentioning Wesley Clark, after the dust had settled, after they have illegally basically taken this part of land from Serbia and seceded it, and announced their independence in 2008, Wesley Clark came back as a CEO and a representative of a private corporation for coal mining. Madeleine Albright, with her Albright International Corporation, came back to be the highest bidder for Kosovo Telecommunications, which was one of the most prosperous corporations in Kosovo. So basically what I'm saying is that the political figures of the United States that are involved in some of these destabilizations of regimes around the world will later on come back as CEOs or representatives of private corporations. And this is not illegal, but at the same time is very immoral to come back and then reap the benefits of privatizing the resources of the country that you have attacked.
They use the resources and the power of the United States military to stand behind one side or the other in the region. They handpicked the new government that would be put in place, and then they come back later as private individuals to benefit.
Head of corporations to benefit privately. And you will definitely be able to see this in Libya. You will be eventually able to see it in Egypt, in Syria, everywhere we have gotten involved. I think later on, the IMF comes into play. They appraise the resources of the country. We go back into, massive loans, privatizations of government-owned corporations, companies, and that is how it spirals out of control.
So would you say this is contributing to the fall of, or the demise of America in parallel with Roman Empire?
It's contributing to the demise of America in terms of all of these private enterprises that are being carried out around the world. The American people are not benefiting at all. The very few who have worked their way up through the government ranks and then showed up as private individuals, as head of corporations, they will benefit, certainly, but nobody else within this country will benefit. And unfortunately, what I am seeing and what I'm thinking, there's no investment into this country anymore. There's no money to invest in infrastructure. Our railroads are very old. If you look at any other European or any other industrialized country, they have high-speed rails, monorails, excellent highways, roads are being built, bridges are being built. Nothing of that sort is happening in the United States. So for some reason, I am almost seeing like somebody is deciding to let the Americans and America with it down the drain. And, we're getting politicians into office who are supposed to uphold the Constitution, who claim to love America, but clearly they hate Americans because they are really not contributing to a betterment.
The decisions that they're making are not contributing to the betterment of America. Now, for the benefit of our viewers, you're speaking of the politicians on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, clearly, Democrats and Republicans. As I said, I see it as one token with two faces. There's really sort of a duopoly that we have going on, and this duopoly that is manipulating the voters, and we really are not seeing fresh voices. One thing that I did address in my article is I was hoping that maybe through the Republican, the Democrats are very much a united front. The Republicans, you can see there's a rift right now going on through the GOP. And unfortunately, I think the Republican Party needs a makeover. But if they do not include some of these younger libertarian voices into the ranks of the GOP, I think the GOP really has no chance.
So you think that the GOP is split right now, and
Absolutely. When you look at, you know, we talked about Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, some of the people that have come from the umbrella of Dr. Ron Paul, I think those voices are very relevant, and they should become prevalent voices in both the Democratic and the Republican Party, because that is one way I see out. That is something that sort of gives me hope. Some of the politicians through these libertarian ranks or the younger voices are running on platforms of non-interventionism, non-militarism. Unfortunately, many of the establishment politicians blame them of isolationism, and I would really like to address this. First of all, United States cannot be isolated even if we wanted to. I think that is a completely bizarre statement. We need to be involved in the world. We are involved in the world. We still are that country that many people see hope in. We can very much be involved diplomatically, economically, with open markets, open trade, free markets, economically. We don't have to bomb countries into submission in order to promote our values. And I will also argue that, and I think there's a great book that came out a couple of years ago. It's called Closing of the Muslim Mind. The reason why I'm going here is I think there needs to be some deep research into certain compatibilities between democracy and certain cultures. Many have raised questions between whether there is compatibility between democracy and Islam. So I would argue that we actually need to look at countries individually. We need to look at their traditions. We need to look at their religion. We need to look at their culture, the family structure. And, you know, democracy, the way we as Americans see it, it's not kind of one size fits all. I think we really need to take into consideration each country specifically and take their values and take their history into consideration in order to be able to communicate with them. We cannot do it bombing people because we basically create chaos. You see that Arab Spring really has not brought about democracy. It has brought about chaos. I will go back again to the Balkans. Kosovo is a frozen
let's
conflict.
talk about Syria for a moment here, because the United States and Russia are now arming opposite sides in the Syrian conflict. How might events there lead or contribute to, as you claim, the coming demise of American influence?
Well, I think the wars that we are being involved in the Middle East, you know, at this point, the wars are being fought by proxies, and we have, you know, different armies and different countries almost doing some of our dirty work. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, with Syria, we are treading a dangerous ground just because Russia has a really heavy influence in Syria. And the bottom line, I think I kind of want to get to the bottom line. The bottom line of all of the conflicts that we are involved in, and the ultimate target of all of these conflicts, I think, is Russia and China as well. That is very evident in Syria. Henry Kissinger came out not too long ago and said that the maybe most viable option for Syria would be Balkanization of Syria, which then tells you that the Yugoslav scenario is very evident, particularly in the case of Syria. Egypt is very similar. Iran is very similar. You know, Russia has this alliance with Iran. And I want to speak about that for a little bit. Iran is an old civilization that has a 3,000-year-long history. I seriously doubt that they are on this suicide mission, you know. Yes, there are threats out there, and they have been known for certain negative rhetoric, but I doubt that they are on a suicide mission, and they know that this would be if they get into a war with the United States or Israel. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing also in Syria, what we're seeing in Egypt, is outmost rage and killing and mistreatment of Christians. And what is really interesting to me is actually that Vladimir Putin was the one who came out and said, stop prosecuting the Christians in the Middle East, especially in Syria. You see what's happening with the Coptic Christians in Egypt. And our president is sitting and saying nothing about it. They just 2 days ago came out with the statement once all the churches were burned in Egypt in the past few days. My information from the sources that I have is about 40 Christian churches were burned down in the past couple of days. So basically, you have the same scenario that happened in the Balkans. We have turned against our natural ally, our historical ally, the Christian Serbs, and they were always viewed as an extension of Russia. And that is why it seems, we are trying to prevent Russians' entrance into the Adriatic Sea and the warm waters of the Mediterranean. And I think that is why we are fighting these wars even in the Middle East.
Olga, let's talk about that for a minute, because with the United States currently the world's largest military superpower by far, as well as one of the largest economic forces, what happens to the world if America does fall apart? Can Russia or China simply step in and take the place of the United States? Does any country need to play the role in the world that America has played since the Cold War ended?
I don't think any country needs to play the policeman of the world. That is one very important segment. I think many analysts have predicted that Russia, China, maybe even Brazil, India are coming up as global economic powers. Whether they're going to replace the United States completely, I don't know if that's going to happen. I think, we still can work together. Clearly, we have a relationship with China that bond is almost unbreakable, economic bond that we have. They are coming up as strong economies. It is very possible that they will take the place of the United States. The latest book by Zbigniew Brzezinski, he somewhat speaks about that. And, for the first time, you can sense even in his book this sentiment of worrying almost, this a little bit of discouragement, where he's seeing also and pointing towards some of these things, that America slowly is crumbling as an economic power, as a global superpower.
Well, at the same time, Brzezinski's also warned of he seems to be worried about this global awakening that's taken place, of people becoming aware of these problems and acting on them.
Absolutely. And, many young, educated people are now finally waking up. And what's very fascinating to me is some people that have even woken up in the United States are all of a sudden finding this new respect for Vladimir Putin, for some of the policies that he's implementing. And for some of us who have grown up during the Cold War, things like this were impossible. It was hard to imagine that something like that would transpire. So obviously, the winds are changing, as they say, in the world. And I am afraid that somewhat we have contributed to
I should ask you this.
Our demise.
You mentioned Putin and Russia. What can be said about Russia granting asylum to an American whistleblower, wherein prior President Obama said that he would protect whistleblowers, but now they have to flee and go to a rival superpower?
And that is the policy he ran on, this transparency, and everybody was expecting it. And, I find it quite bizarre that speaking the truth actually gets you in trouble in the United States of America, of all places in the world. But, spying on people is really not anything new, I don't think. I think every country has their systems in place that, spy on terrorists, spy on, domestic terrorists, foreign terrorists. It's nothing new, although the new technology is making it, a little more obvious. And unfortunately, I'm sure that Russia does the same thing. Whether Putin is concerned about Edward Snowden, I don't think so. But I think that, we have snubbed our face into, snubbed our fingers into Putin's face so many times that now he could possibly use this as leverage, whether he can ask for I don't know, maybe independence for South Ossetia or Abkhazia. Maybe he can ask for some more leniency when it comes to the Syrian situation. You know, it's up in the air. We don't know what's going to happen, but I definitely find it very interesting that he did it. And quite frankly, I'm happy that he did it. And I think the whistleblowers and people who are willing to come forward and willing to speak the truth and willing to protect the American people, in my eyes, they are a hero and they do deserve to be heard. And I think we need transparency and we need to know what the government is doing. You know, I can say, you know, I can support spying on terrorists. I can support some of these policies where we are going to find certain threats. But, you know, spying on every single American and, as they call it, over collecting the data, I see no reason for that.
Now, we're talking about the collapse of empire, and I don't want to leave this interview on a downer note, because, you know, we have to come to solutions and find resolution in the policies in America, and sort of take solace in what made this country great. Now we have Edward Snowden, he's a whistleblower. People like Bradley Manning, whistleblower, you know, bringing information that wouldn't normally be, things that wouldn't be in the foreground of the American consciousness right now. Now, aside from those two prominent whistleblowers, what can be done by Americans if we are to prevent a total collapse of the United States in the near future? How do we get back to it? How do we get back to the prosperity that America was once?
Well, as I said, you know, this country was built by noble, hardworking Americans, and I think that needs to prevail. We need to continue fighting for our economic freedom. We need to continue fighting for civil liberties. We need to continue fighting for the Constitution. We need to continue fighting for this ideology that our founding fathers left us with. We need to educate ourselves, and I'm glad that media outlets such as this one are out here to actually stir away from the mainstream media that is just, you know, sort of tooting the horn of the administration that is in power. We need to educate our voters. We need to gather this positive energy from our young Americans, from the youth, and, you know, implement certain policies that will ensure that we are not a policeman of the world, implement policies that will give prosperity and hope and perspective for our children. How do we do that? You know, I'm not an economist. I wish this country the best. I wish I live here, my children live here. This country has given me also great opportunity, and I am grateful for being here. But at the same time, it is hard to think that our tax dollars are going into killing civilians around the world. It's hard to think that my tax dollars were going and killing the Serbian people in my homeland. So I think we need to pull back. We need to go back into some traditional values. We need to look at what values this country was founded upon, Judeo-Christian values. We need to focus on the family structure. I think that is something that is very important, because various policies like war on drugs, war on terrorism are bringing about the collapse of family structure, and I think that is very important. So we need to, I'm not calling upon going back into the conservative ways, but at the same time, I think we need to kind of look into these traditional values that worked for our country, and we need to take a step back and see what worked, what didn't work, and we need to educate the young people, I think, in this manner. And, you know, as you said, I really don't want to leave this interview, nor did I mean to write the article in a negative connotation, but at the same time, living here and being grateful for being here and being grateful for certain freedoms that this country is giving to everybody and giving immigrants, and really doesn't discriminate. I think we need to step back and take a look at the policies that worked, take a look at the policies that don't work, take a look at even some systems around the world that, you know, some social policies that may have worked in other countries that maybe we can implement here. Take a look at the system of capitalism. We don't want to live in a corporatism. We don't want to live in theftocracy or kleptocracy, as I tend to call it sometimes. So we really need to reevaluate what was the country founded upon and what these traditional values meant to these hardworking Americans. And we need to go back there, and I think that is the starting point.